Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 1 of Cooking with Sandro. Hope you are enjoying your last few days of spring break. This is something that I decided to do because we're all stuck at home, and I figure we might as well use what we learned in biology to figure out how to make something delicious. So what we're going to be making today, and feel free to make this at home with me, is called Jim Lahey's No-Knead bread. It's the easiest, fancy bread I know how to make. Fancy as in, crusty and delicious and full of awesome holes and looks like it came from DLM, if you know what I mean. The only equipment that you'll need besides the oven to make this that you might not have is this here, a enameled cast iron Dutch oven. Ask your folks if you've got one laying around somewhere. If not, shoot, you can spend up to $300 on them for a fancy one, or you can do like I did and spend, I think, 40 or 50 for a cheap one. I don't know that there's a difference, or at least I can't tell what. Anyway, putting the dough together is super easy. You just need flour, you need salt, and you need baker's yeast. This is Fleischmann's Rapid Rise. Pretty easy to find. Maybe not right now, but maybe you've got some. And then water. So let's just put it together real quick. We get 3 cups of flour. You can use regular all-purpose flour or bread flour, which has a higher gluten content, which we'll talk about later. You need a teaspoon of yeast. Doesn't take a whole lot. And then you need a teaspoon and a quarter of salt. I use kosher salt, or you can just use regular salt. Not gonna matter. Okay, and then you take that 3 1/3 cups of cool water and you dump it in there. Stir everything up. And you're basically just making a flour and water paste. And that flour and water paste should end up being a little bit stickier than you expect. It's going to be kind of a runny dough after all is said and done, after the yeast did their work. So this is a pretty sticky dough we're going to get. If it's not sticky enough, if it's real dry, feel free to add a little bit more water. If it's super wet and kind of starts to pool and flow and stuff, you can feel free to add a little bit more of the flour. But that's what mine looks like. It's pretty shaggy. That's how it's supposed to be. And so the next step, this is the really easy part, is you cover this sucker up and you just wait. You wait, actually, ideally 12 to 18 hours. And so, I tend to do it maybe in the late afternoon one day and then actually do the baking in the morning of the next day. So I like to wait the full 18 hours. You want to cover it. Forgot that part. We're going to cover it. And then what's happening during that 12 to 18 hours is the little microscopic fungi that are yeast, okay, this stuff right here, is waking up, and it's starting to actually start to eat and chop up the amylose sugars, the starches, right, into glucose, and starting to digest those. And you know what it's doing, right? You've learned the process of fermentation. It's a way of getting ATP without oxygen, right? Yeast don't have an electron transport chain. They have to do something else with the stuff coming out of glycolysis, right? They use glycolysis, they get their 2 ATP from each glucose molecule, but then they have to take those products of glycolysis, which were, do you remember? NADH, right? And what else? What was the other thing? Do you remember? Okay, so it's been 18 hours, almost exactly. Did you remember what the other product of glycolysis was? If you said pyruvic acid, you were right. Now remember, normally you're sending the NADH and the pyruvic acid to the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. But yeast can't do that, right? They have to use something else called fermentation. And remember, when your muscles run out of oxygen, they use lactic acid fermentation. They take the NADH and the pyruvic acid and they change it into lactic acid, which is kind of the only product only byproduct, only waste product, and then they recycle that NADH, they strip the electron off of it and send it back to glycolysis so that it can keep going. Well, yeast don't do that. They do something else. They produce still NAD plus to go back to glycolysis, but their byproducts, there's two. There's alcohol, which doesn't really matter because it's going to bake off in the bread, but also carbon dioxide. And that's the stuff that matters here. So take a look at this. Holy smokes, look at that. That is bubbles. And so what's cool about flour is it's got, first of all, it's obviously got the starch and stuff, but it's also got gluten, which is a protein that forms all these little networks and traps those bubbles that are coming off, the carbon dioxide bubbles, and traps them in there. And that's what makes bread rise. It's what makes this dough rise. And we're going to give it a chance to rise here with some protection. And so the first thing you do after the 18 hours are up is whatever work surface you got, you can use a cutting board or whatever, but you're going to sprinkle it with a layer of flour, like enough to really coat the bottom of the dough. You're going to dump that dough out onto it, and then you're going to shape it. Okay, so once you've got a nice coating there, we're not quite done with the flour yet, we are going to turn this sucker out, and it's going to be real stringy, kind of gross looking. That doesn't matter. We're going to be able to shape it just fine anyway. I'm going to dump it out right onto that flour. Perfect. Give a little bit of room to expand there. And now the trick is you're going to take a kitchen towel, and you want something for your cloth here that is kind of a nice fine woven cloth. You don't want something like, you don't want terry cloth, like towel stuff, like bath towel stuff. You want the dough to not be able to soak too much into it, but you're going to sprinkle a bunch of flour on it too, so that that keeps it from soaking in there a little bit too. And then we are going to shape the dough, basically pull the stuff that has flour on it to the middle, right? And so you can see we're kind of just folding up and bringing the floured stuff so that it's on the outside of the dough, and there's kind of a seam in the middle, right? And I'm going to pull a little bit more, and then I'm going to turn this whole glob over onto the towel, just like that. And then I'm going to wrap it. Okay, I'm going to wrap the dough in the towel. I'm going to put that big dough ball into a bowl, and then I am going to set it aside in not a cold place in your house, like maybe one of the warmer places in your house, and I'm going to let that sit for 2 hours. And I want it to basically have doubled in size or close to that by the time I bake it. Now, about halfway through that 2 hours, I'm going to set my oven to 475 degrees. Let it get real hot with the cast iron skillet inside. Cast iron skillet with lid in the oven. Turn the oven on to 475 and let it sit for at least 45 minutes, okay? Okay, so it is 2 hours later. Our dough has risen. We unwrap it here, and if it doesn't stick too much to the top, you can just see that it's definitely bigger. I don't know if it's quite twice its size, but close enough. And so the next thing, if you remembered to put the enameled cast iron Dutch oven in the preheated 475 degree oven, now you got to get it out, and it's super hot. So oven mitts, grab it out of there, take the lid off. Woo, smoky. And we are literally going to dump the dough face first into the Dutch oven. Let's see how this goes. It's not always the smoothest process. Hopefully it won't stick too much to the cloth. Be careful of your hands. Oh, it's sticking. It is for sure sticking. Of course it is. Nothing ever goes perfectly in the Sandro kitchen. But we got this, right, Nora? Yeah. All right. Awesome. And so It's gonna kind of shake around in there a little bit, and you know what? That is perfectly okay. We're gonna put the lid on. We're gonna put the Dutch oven in the hot oven. And then we are going to wait 30 minutes, and by 30 minutes, it's done with this kind of steaming part, which makes the bread spring up as the gas inside it expands. That's called oven spring. It's not because of the yeast, it's because of the bubbles that the yeast made are getting bigger as they heat up. And so you don't want it to harden before it's gotten to its maximum size. And so after 30 minutes, it's done that, and we can pull the lid off and cook it for another 15 until it becomes real nice and brown. So, hope it works.
Hello everybody, welcome back. This is my favorite part because we get to see fresh and delicious bread from the oven. I hope you can make this awesome and delicious bread at your house too.
Thanks, Nora.
You're welcome.
All right, this is it. Get your oven mitts on, and we've been about 45 minutes in the oven. This sucker is hot, so be careful. And it should plop right out of there. Actually, I think I'm going to use a pair of tongs. Wrong one. All right, I know what I'm doing. I promise.
He knows what he's doing. He's pretty good at baking.
And there you have it. So yeah, I hope, very much so, me and Nora hope that you can do this at home. Give it a shot. You just need flour, yeast, if you can get it, and that enameled cast iron skillet. I hope you enjoyed episode 1 of Cooking with Sandro's. And let me know. Let me know what you thought. Send me pictures of your delicious bread if you make some.
And we do not know if there's going to be an episode 2.
We don't. It just depends on if people like it or not. All right.
I hope to see you soon.
Yep, happy end of spring break.
And happy Easter.
We'll see you for a brain teaser on Monday. Bye, guys.